Good morning. I'd like to convene the February 3rd meeting of the Oregon Global Warming Commission. Welcome to commissioners and those in the public that are joining us this morning. We are nearing the wrap up of a big project, the roadmap that we've been working on, and the analysis of Oregon's progress towards meeting our greenhouse gas emissions. And staff have been working really hard to develop out and refine the recommendations and to draft the report that will go along with the recommendations. So first and foremost, I really want to thank Alan and Zach for incredible work that they've been doing and a lot of work from other agencies that have been engaged to help us reflect on the recommendations. So welcome everyone. We did get public comment, and the public comment was distributed to the commission in advance of this meeting. There were some helpful recommendations in the comments that we got from the public and good questions. We will have more time today for public comment. We're anticipating that will be about at 10:30. Am I correct on that, Zach?
I think that's right.
Great. And then, great, thank you. Linda, will you remind folks what they need to do to let us know that they want to provide public comment? Linda?
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Good morning. If you are a public, if you're in the public and you're an attendee and you are wanting to raise your hand to say something, look down. There's at the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a smiley emoji, and right next to it, there's a hand. You can click on that. If you don't have that and you're calling in, you can hit *3, and that will also raise your hand, and I will unmute you. Those of you who are panelists, you have the opportunity to go ahead and unmute and mute yourself. You can raise your hand to indicate that you do want to be called on, and Kathy will give you a call. We'll call on you. Thanks.
Thank you, and we will take public comment. Generally, we don't take public comments outside of that public comment period, but there are opportunities if you have a question to put that in the chat, and if we have time and can address that during the meeting, we'll try and do that, but we can't guarantee that, but we will take public comment. With that, I wanted to open things up for updates, and I believe Director Benner has an update for us.
Thank you, Chair McDonald. I wanted to just share one quick thing on federal funding. I know with the Inflation Reduction Act and the technical term oodles of money for greenhouse gas reduction efforts in states, there's a lot of interest there. So I wanted to share that the EPA opened a request for information on their climate pollution reduction grant program, which was part of the IRA. It's, I think, $5 billion to states for greenhouse gas reduction projects, and some of that money is set aside for grants to states to do planning for greenhouse gas reductions. So the Oregon Department of Energy and DEQ submitted a letter to EPA in response to that request for information a couple weeks ago that encouraged EPA to think flexibly about states that had taken a great deal of action to plan for and address climate change, acknowledge that states are at different levels, and that there are states like Oregon that have existing plans and programs in place that could spend that federal money, pretty darn quickly. So, for example, we have, many of the programs outlined in the Tigger analysis that are helping us get to our goals and would benefit from federal funding. and this letter encourages EPA to look at how we could get some of that money out to states like Oregon quickly. So maybe, I don't know how to share the mechanism of putting the letter in the chat, but maybe I can work with Zach and Linda to get the letter up on the Global Warming Commission's website if there's interest, because it does refer to this great work that the team is doing.
Great. Thank you, Director Benner. Any other updates from other commissioners or representatives?
Kathy, I'll just pop in. I might be the only legislative commissioner here today. I'm trying to pop in and just to encourage your work along the way, even though I can't stay very long. Recently, I'm going for biggest fan among legislative delegates with you. So, in terms of a legislative update, I know many of your members are tracking us already a great deal, but we're rolling at the legislature, and Director Banner turns out to be a frequent flyer right now in our Climate and Energy Committee, and I'm very thankful for that. She's getting us level set as a committee on the intersection between energy and climate, which is really beneficial, and I'm appreciative. So laying the groundwork for more good work to come.
Thank you, Representative Helm. Really appreciate you attending, and especially during a busy session. And I'd love to follow up with you about bills that you are advancing. We had hoped to be able to have a summary of all the bills that relate to the Commission's work, but that's a tall order at this point in the session, and so we don't have that yet. But Odo staff have been working on that, and we hope to have that soon, and we'll also put that up for the public to be able to see. But appreciate updates from you, Representative Helm. Thank you. Just looking at my list of people who are here. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and do the roll call. And if I missed someone, please let me know. In terms of our voting members, Commissioner Shippentauer, if you just indicate that you're here.
Here.
Commissioner Reitman.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Apter.
Here.
Commissioner Ford.
Here.
And then I note that Mary Morelands is attending, I assume, on behalf of Commissioner Anderson.
Correct. Here. Thank you.
Thank you. And then representing agencies, Director Bateman.
This is Cody Meyer in absentia for Director Bateman.
Oh, great. Thank you. Director Benner, who we just heard from.
Yes, and Chair McDonald, I'm going to have to excuse myself in the middle of the meeting for another for a conflict, but I'll try to come back. And
Great.
of course, we
Thank
have
you.
lots of Odo staff here who can stand in for me.
Thank you. Danny Norlander for Oregon Department of Forestry.
Good morning. And
Good
likewise,
morning.
I have another thing in the middle, so I'll be stepping away, but I'll be back.
Thank you, Danny. Kelly Mintz. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, with Water Resources.
Here.
Thank you, Kelly. Gabriella Goldfarb with OHA.
Yes, here. Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. Judith Callens from ODA.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And Suzanne Carlson with Oregon Department of Transportation.
Good morning.
Did I miss anyone else?
Chair McDonald, Kristen Sharon is here.
Oh, great. Excellent. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Well, with that, I will turn things over to Zach and we can get right down to business.
Thanks, Chair McDonald. Good morning, commissioners. Looking forward to the conversation today. Just wanted to show this slide because we're getting super close to the finish line here, and this conversation today will hopefully allow us to be able to cross that finish line. So I put together a number of slides here to try to help folks understand the final draft recommendations that we've posted with the changes from the updated draft recommendations that we all discussed at the last meeting. And just wanted to thank everyone, the commissioners, the public, state agencies for their comments on the recommendations. Found them very helpful in refining them. And what I plan to do today is to try to run through the substantive changes we made to the recommendations informed by those comments. And as you can see in the next slide, the 6 overarching strategies have remained the same from the updated draft recommendations that we discussed. We added the words robust and continuous in the first one to just add a little more emphasis to the extent of implementation of the existing programs. And then the remaining strategies to adopt updated state greenhouse gas reduction goals, advance a set of additional climate actions to meet the accelerated 2030 goal, fund future studies, strengthen governance and accountability, and position the state to take full advantage of federal investments coming, all stayed the same. So what changed? We made substantive changes in all of the recommendations 1 through 6, and some pretty extensive changes to recommendation 3 on the TIGR actions. And then under each of those recommendations, we made changes in the introductory text as well as the sub-recommendations. We added one additional sub-recommendation, recommendation 4B, regarding regularly updating the roadmap, which I'll talk about a little later. And then we made a number of minor editorial changes, formatting, typo-like changes, clarifications, and some small text moves. We didn't include those minor editorial changes in the red line that we posted with the recommendations to hopefully help focus attention on the substantive changes. And also, you know, it's kind of hard to say which exactly is a substantive change or not. It may depend on folks. So we did the best we could to make sure and preserve the ones that we thought the commission potentially would want to discuss. So I did want to say that I'm going to break up my presentation with opportunities for Q&A and initial discussion. So this segment this morning before public comment and the break is just to have an opportunity to run through the changes and for the commissioners to ask any questions that you all might have or any initial comments. And then after public comment and the break, the commission will deliberate more fully on the recommendations. So this is more of the informational side of trying to just make sure the changes that we made are clear to everyone. So
Zach, just a quick interruption. Just wanted to recognize that Director Bateman is also with us from DLCD. Thank you, Director Bateman.
Awesome. So in terms of what to expect for the next couple of slides, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run us through first recommendations 1 and 2, and then pause for Q&A, and then run us through recommendation 3, and then pause for Q&A and any discussion there. And then we'll close out with recommendations 4 through 6, and then open it up for conversation. So there'll be a couple points where I'll stop and would love any questions from commissioners for clarification. All right. So to start with the specific changes, recommendation 1, which deals with existing programs, we included in the introductory text to the recommendation the actual list of the programs and regulations adopted, or the PRA, those 15 programs that were part of the TIGR analysis, so that folks could easily see it. We also better highlighted the fact that 2 of the PRA programs, HB 2021 and the Climate Protection Program, account for the majority of emissions reductions, and given their novelty and breadth, particularly need support and attention. We, at the same time, also continue to note the importance of other existing programs that were not analyzed as part of the PRA, like DLCD's Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Program, and provided a little bit more specificity on that particular program. Under sub-recommendation A, we didn't want, quote, operate as planned to be read too literally, as there's a possibility that experience with implementing the existing programs and regulations moving forward may also inform and warrant expansion of the programs, as happened with the clean fuels programs. And there was public comment that noted the possibility that existing programs could be expanded to meet updated goals in the future. So just wanted to make sure and add a little clarification that those programs definitely need to be operated as planned, but in the future they also may be expanded. Then under sub-recommendation B, we wanted to make sure interagency coordination was noted as an important piece of maximizing implementation of existing programs and regulations. And so we noted the collaboration between the Department of Transportation, DEQ, DLCD, and ODO on the statewide transportation strategy as a key example to help illustrate that point. And then there weren't any substantive changes to the sub-recommendation C. And instead of putting up the red line here to go through as I'm talking, we just put in the sub-recommendations. And so I'm just talking through these. But if there are particular edits that folks want to zero in on, please do raise those in Q&A, and I have the red line up to be able to pull it over if we need to talk about the specific wording. All right, so recommendation 2, which is dealing with updating the greenhouse gas goals for the state. There were some changes we made in the introductory text. We added a reference to the global nature of the Paris Agreement temperature limits, so like the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, and the importance of developed countries with more resources like the US to be setting the strongest targets. This is something the Commission has tried to note in the past, and we had something similar in the greenhouse gas goals memo earlier on that we posted a while back, and so brought that concept over to these final draft recommendations. We also noted that between Oregon setting the statutory goals in 2007 and the executive order goals in 2020, the Commission had recommended a 2035 target back in 2015. And we noted that to help illustrate the importance of the Global Warming Commission's role, and also the importance of a better mechanism for ensuring more regular updates of the goals as needed based on those recommendations. So then turning to the sub-recommendations, under sub-recommendation B, which recommends updating the greenhouse gas emission reduction goals for the state, we ended up landing on the 95% reduction by 2050 because of public comment and consistent with ambition of our West Coast neighbors. There was a fair amount of conversation with the commission over the last couple of meetings about where to land on 90 or 95%. And again, based on public comment and also recognizing consistency with our West Coast neighbors and ambition of our West Coast neighbors, we went with the 95%, and happy to discuss that more if needed after I get through the rest of this recommendation here. So on sub-recommendation C, you'll see there's a lot of text changes here, and at a high level, where the sub-recommendation was before was to legislatively declare that it was in the intent of the state to achieve a net zero emissions by 2050 or as soon as practicable. We, in conversations over the last couple of meetings and at the last meeting, it came up, there was some potential interest in also adding a net negative goal to accompany the net zero goal. And so we did a little bit more work on that and looked at the IPCC scenarios, and the IPCC does note that many of the net zero emission scenarios continue on to a net negative after. So at the same time, California has a setup where they have a net zero goal and then a net negative goal thereafter. And so we basically followed that here, and that's what we were trying to achieve with this change here. We also noted that there would need to be a little bit more conversation as part of the overall work on net zero accounting, consistent with the EPA guidance and IPCC interpretations of net zero. So those were the substantive changes to this particular sub-recommendation. And then for the last sub-recommendation here, sub-recommendation D, which focuses on the updating the goals consistent with best available science, we wanted to make sure that we were also including the net zero and net negative goals above, because it's not just updating our emissions reduction goals, like the sector-based goals that we have in statute, but also if there are then net zero and net negative goals, those could also be updated with different years or more specificity. And so we used sequestration goals, and you'll see that throughout the document, as a way to capture the net zero and net negative goals that we're talking about in sub-recommendation C. So that is the, I'm going to pause here. We've gotten through recommendation 1 and 2, and see if there are any questions or things that folks want to discuss.
I have a friendly amendment to the way C is worded. And we'll put that in the chat. Basically just trying to make it clear that I see a distinction between sequestration goals and net zero and net negative goals. And think we should refer to this as, you know, set net zero and net negative goals, and direct the commission to look at how to achieve those goals through increases in sequestration in the land sector. So a slight modification of the language, and I'll go ahead and drop it in the chat. consideration.
So Chair McDonald, could you say that one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, so to me, the way this is worded is a little confusing because net negative and net zero and net negative is it's not just about sequestration. It's about sector-based and sequestration goals. And so I would recommend we propose net zero and net negative goals in statute, and then determine how we can invest in natural and working land sequestration as part of how we meet those goals. So a slight modification of this. And the one thing I'm not sure of is if this, I'll drop it in again just to make sure I get the wording.
Thanks, Chair McDonald. I definitely appreciate, I think, what you're going for with this proposed edit. I wonder, looking at the language that you dropped in the chat, whether there could be reference to the state natural resource agencies that are directed in the existing National Working Lands proposal, and that will have a role in implementing these types of incentives and voluntary sequestration actions. I think definitely want to underscore the role of the Global Warming Commission in continuing to implement the sequestration recommendations, but I think an explicit call out to our natural resource agencies will be important too. And perhaps there's something more explicit we could add here as well related to leveraging federal funding, or you mentioned incentives, and I don't see that in this language here, but maybe it's in I can refer back to the broader recommendations. Maybe it's out of context, not saying it.
Would you be comfortable with having that additional text in the description of the recommendation? Or would you like it to see it in the headline?
Oh, I see. I think the description works great.
Okay.
So just one other quick comment, if I may, Chair McDonald.
Absolutely.
I have to think a little bit about this. So I guess during this meeting, I'll do some additional thought, but I don't know that I'm comfortable changing the language and see at the bottom that these goals, because I think we've talked about net zero excluding excluding the national working lands component. So am I misreading this, or when we go to net negative, I would think we'd want to include those contributions from national working lands in our calcs.
Definitely, both for net zero and net negative would include sequestration as a way.
Okay. Okay. All right. Maybe I just misread this.
Chair McDonald,
Yes.
I guess that at one point we talked about how difficult it was to achieve that last 5 to 10%. And so it seems like we're going to have to use sequestration to get to net zero.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean we let everybody else off the hook, that we're going to that we need to continue to try to achieve net zero. But it seems like we need to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, this just would change the wording to indicate that the state would want to set a net zero and net negative goals, and that we would achieve that through actions to increase sequestration in natural and working lands.
So that gives responsibility to the natural and working land agencies to come up with those plans.
Exactly. Yep. And I think we could add in the headline, direct the Global Warming Commission to work with ODA, ODF, OWEB, and other state agencies to achieve the goal for net negative and net zero and net negative, or we could indicate those agencies will be an important part of that in the description of the recommendation. I did drop the edit into the chat. I do think, I think there might be a word that didn't work because I cut and pasted from a red line, but it's close. I can clean it up a little bit more and drop it back in later in the meeting. Any other discussion of the first and second recommendations and the changes that Zach walked us through?
Chair McDonald, this is Gabriella Goldfarb, Oregon Health Authority, and I wanted to wait until recommendation 2 discussion was done because I have a comment on recommendation 1.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and, is there anything else 2 that people want to discuss?
I'm happy to maybe keep the wordsmithing with you offline, Chair McDonald, if we want to move on. I guess the one thing I'm still stuck on with this edit is whether there is any sort of statutory recommendation related to sequestration more generally, or if the main statutory goals that are being recommended are to update or set net zero emissions targets, and then sequestration related actions are separate from that legislatively directed recommendation.
As I think as I edited it, the net zero and net negative would be in we would be proposing to put that in statute, and then come up with an update of our proposal for how to achieve that through increased sequestration. We could have net zero, net negative, and a sequestration goal in statute. We had not been, we proposed some numbers for increased sequestration. We suggested that they not be put into statute yet, while the Natural and Working Lands Advisory Committee is doing its work. And while we're kind of setting baselines and talking further about accounting, but we could recommend just net negative, net zero, net negative, or net zero, net negative, and specific sequestration goals. Do you have go ahead, Commissioner Ford?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to end this discussion, I mean, it seems like we do have, it would be appropriate to wait on the sequestration target until the National Working Lands comes back to the commission with a recommendation on that point. I think it's premature to do that. So that's kind of my quick feedback.
That makes sense to me. Thanks for laying that out, Chair McDonald. Yeah, still happy to maybe think about some language that adds some specificity in terms of the role of the natural resource agencies and added investments and programs. But I think that we can move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a clarifying question. So by putting the net zero and negative goal in the same paragraph as C, as where we're talking about setting statutory sequestration goals, is the implication that the only path to net zero for the state should be through land use, sequestration as compared to other options for sequestration? And should that be, if that is in fact the policy recommendation, should that be clearer?
It's a good question. So you're thinking, where are we, what are we thinking about, like geologic sequestration and other direct air capture?
Or even a lot of places when they set a net zero goal or even potentially entertaining things like offsets from, other kinds of activities. So if we're really, I guess I'm still confused in terms of, is the recommendation that, we set sequestration goals, that part is clear, and we want the state to get to net zero, but is it, we can only get to net zero through land use based sequestration, or is it, we have to get to net zero and we should have land use based sequestration goals, and we're sort of leaving open the possibility that there may be other net zero opportunities that that, you know, flow in to help us get there. And I'm not sure which one it is we're recommending here.
That's a great question. I don't think, you know, at least the last time we met, we talked about the fact that we kind of want all the tools in the toolbox at our disposal. So from my own point of view, wouldn't recommend that we only think about sequestration in natural and working lands as the way to get to net zero and net negative, but that it would be one of the options.
Then my suggestion might be to clarify that we don't put those together in paragraph C, that we have a paragraph C that is, let's set the following statutory sequestration goals, and then the additions that, you know, everybody just talked about as far as those goals are concerned. And then sort of another, you know, bullet that says, and the state should set net zero, you know, a goal of net zero emissions as soon as practical, no later than 2050, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the putting them together in one paragraph, at least for me, suggested that one is the path to the other. And I think what I'm hearing is we're not necessarily saying that it's the exclusive path to the other. And so to avoid any confusion about that, I might put them down as two separate things that we want the state to do.
That sounds right to me. Any discussion of Commissioner Sheeran's recommended approach?
That sounds right to me as well.
So we would take C and break it into a C and D, a new D, and one would address setting sequestration goals, and the other would be setting net zero and net negative goals. Any dissent about that change?
Chair McDonald, can I just ask for a clarification? So would the commission be directed in both of those to be the one to provide recommendations on how to meet those goals? Or would it be left open? I think there was part of this recommendation was to have the Global Warming Commission be the one providing recommendations on how to meet the goals given the work that has happened prior through the National Working Lands Advisory Committee and ongoing. But just because there is some uncertainty and a lot of questions, including how accounting happens for these goals, that there was a thought that it would be important to make it clear that the Global Warming Commission needs to be involved in
Agreed.
In these recommendations.
Yes, I would say we should be involved in how making recommendations on how the state gets to all of our goals, all of our climate goals. So I would make sure that the Global Warming Commission is involved in both the new C and D. Any other questions or comments about that? One thing for us to think about as we go into approval of the recommendations later in this meeting is, you know, how much we can nail down the language and how much direction we want to give to staff to make modifications on our behalf, following the intent of the conversation that we're having. So we can come back and talk about that later in the meeting, but I just wanted to flag that I think we want to give the staff a little bit of latitude in doing any additional cleanup and potentially putting the discussion that we're having into words. We'll try and do that during the meeting, but if we can't get there, then it might be important for us to give the staff the latitude to make a few additional changes following our intent. Okay, so summarizing this, we're going to create, we're going to break C into two parts, one dealing with sequestration and the other dealing with net zero and net negative goals. The commission will be implicated in helping to determine how we're going to go about doing both of those things. I think we also discussed that we're not ready to put the sequestration goals into statute at this time. But I think we may be ready to put the net zero and net negative into statute at this time. Any further discussion of two? If not, we'll go back to one and take Gabrielle's comment. Okay, Gabriella?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about sub recommendation B. That's framed as providing resources for additional.
Zach, can you go back to recommendation 1 for us, please? Thank you.
For additional public engagement and contracting to support updating the roadmap every 4 years. And specifically, I think the issue that OHA raised is that the COBRA model is great for a good framing of air quality impacts, for example, but since these are really targeting Oregon legislators, having sort of whole of government implications for the money that they need to shell out for different things, including specifically, the Oregon Health Plan as an example. That's that last line, as well as additional resources for a more comprehensive analysis of the co-benefits of the actions identified. And this whole section being framed as we need to update the roadmap, I just don't know how compelling that is going to be for folks. And so I wanted to suggest, a reframing as to, why this would be important to do. So it's more the end result, rather than saying we need resources to update, it's we need to be able to, in the sub point that I was bringing up, identify the true costs and benefits more accurately to inform decision making. And it's a little bit separate from the need, related, but there's also the need to really better engage community in the development and implementation, not the how, but the development, back to the updating idea. So it's just, I don't have specific language now. Happy to work offline if that's helpful. But I guess I wanted to get a sense of whether people see that as an issue and would support reframing, so that the legislators are not saying, we want money to update this. It's more, you need better information to inform your decision making.
So I think that you're referring to recommendation 4. Is that where Zach? Help me. I don't think it's recommendation 1.
I think you're talking about recommendation 4B, the new one that we added. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's also in, is it just 4? I thought it's, oh, maybe I did. Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm out of order.
That's okay.
I take it back. I withdraw. My apologies. We'll catch up. I'll catch up with you later.
I think your point's well taken. We want to be able to, make a really good case for the importance of updating and providing better information to decision makers, both in the legislature and I think in the administration, on how to best move forward. So I think make a very good point.
Okay, great. I don't know how I mixed that up. I think I was doing a keyword search and it the health word appeared in a couple times. So
No
thanks
problem.
for your patience with me.
No problem. Did anyone else have any other questions or comments on recommendation 1? The headlines didn't change that much, but the text underneath them did. And staff, I think, tried to reflect the conversations that we had, as well as the comments that we got from agencies to strengthen the importance of the existing programs and make sure that that we didn't shortchange any of those really important bodies of work that need to continue and expand. Okay. I don't see any hands up. Hearing none. Let's go ahead and Zach, do you want to dig in on 3?
Yes, thanks, Chair McDonald. So this recommendation had pretty extensive changes. So I'll try to walk through, and I'm guessing there'll probably be some questions and some more conversation. So at the high level, we moved away from recommending the tiered action. So this recommendation deals with all the new TIGR actions, and there was a lot of conversation at the last meeting because the recommendation had a tiering of those actions. So we moved away from that tiering, and also the recommendation regarding further study. There were a number of actions that were identified for further study before they could be implemented. And I'll talk about the details of that a little bit more as we go through here. But first, just so we included a lot more background and context in the introductory text of this recommendation. So we noted at the start of the section that the existing programs and regulations are also necessary to meet the accelerated greenhouse gas goals. So not just the TIGR action. So just making a crosswalk for folks that the existing programs and regulations are important and also somewhat contribute to making these new TIGR actions successful. And that was something that came up in comments that we received. There were also, we added more background on how we got to the TIGR actions and detail on the scenarios, just explaining the number of actions that were originally considered, and then how we ended up with the actions that are now the subset of TIGR actions. We included a table of all of the TIGR actions analyzed, whether they were common or unique to each scenario, and we sorted them by greenhouse gas emission reduction amounts. So we had previously sorted and presented all of the actions by tier. So that was not done here, and we kind of represented all of the actions just based on greenhouse gas reduction amount. So that is a new view of the actions that is important and will become more important as I continue. We also included a table counting the actions by focus area. So, for example, building energy efficiency or transportation and land use. We added land use as a categorization for the actions because, for example, reducing residential building floor area was originally classified as building energy efficiency, but primarily a land use action based on some of the conversations we've had as a commission and with agencies, and so wanted to highlight the land use connection and that there are actions that address land use in these TIGR actions. And we combined the transportation and land use categorization to better underscore the relationship of some of the actions and the role of land use. So, for example, one of the actions is achieving 10% micro mobility mode share using like e-bikes and the like. And it's a transportation action, but it also rests on compact land uses. So a lot of these changes were inspired by comments from DLCD and conversations. The last kind of framing introductory thing that we did was we included data on the economic and health benefits of the scenarios, as well as numbers on job creation, just to help illustrate all of the analysis that was done and the benefits of doing these actions. Okay, so that's the additional context, and then on to the actual sub-recommendations here. So sub-recommendation A is the one that originally included a tiered prioritization of actions. As I mentioned, we did away with that and emphasized that all of the actions need to move forward, doing the action implementation plans. We noted also that state agencies may need more financial and staff resources to develop the action implementation plans called for each of the actions, and included that as a key component of the recommendation. And just as a reminder, the action implementation plans would address the who, i.e. which agency, what, when, where, and how the action could be implemented. Which state agency will lead development of the action implementation plans is not detailed out in this recommendation. We haven't yet moved on to the implementation phase of the roadmap process, so we don't have all of the specifics worked out on those action implementation plans, but we assume that the agencies will be responsible for developing action implementation plans for actions within their purviews. So for example, DEQ would work on the action implementation plan for the food waste program action, and ODOT would work on the congestion pricing action, et cetera. So the role of the Global Warming Commission will be to work with the agencies to ensure the action implementation plans are done in a timely and coordinated fashion. Finally, we added some urgency to the development of the action implementation plans by including a timeline for development of them. We said as soon as possible and no later than September 2024. We felt this was important to add some urgency to the development of the plans, to the point a number of folks made about not just doing more study. And at the same time, we recognize it will be a large undertaking and some actions will take longer to detail out than others. So September 2024 also lines up well to have the action implementation plans ready for the 2025 regular legislative session. So that's the high-level changes to the sub-recommendation A.
Just a little bit to add. I think we also tried to clarify that some of the actions that are included in the the new actions that we're recommending are underway, and work has already started on them. So we didn't want to imply that nothing is being done, for example, on the food waste program or congestion pricing and others. So I think we tried to clarify that too in the language to just make it clearer that some have a kind of a known path for potential implementation, some are in the works, and some are going to be a lot more kind of R&D needed first before we exactly know how to approach it. Is that a fair characterization, Zach?
Yes, we included some general language around that.
Back to you.
All right. So on sub-recommendation B, this sub-recommendation originally identified a list of TIGR actions for further study. And we heard the concerns about how some of the actions were categorized and whether they need further study, and also concern over potential delay that further study implied for these actions. In addition, we also thought some study could also happen as part of development of the action implementation plans, and the additional research and study needs could be identified in the action implementation plans if needed. So some of what Chair McDonald was saying, we put some language in sub-recommendation A. This also kind of melds over to sub-recommendation B, and so we moved away from the specific recommendation that we had, and in its place, consistent with the thinking of seeing action sooner rather than later, given the urgency of climate action, the new sub-recommendation includes a recommendation for prioritizing 5 actions in the immediate term, and meaning prioritizing development and implementation of their action implementation plans. This would effectuate some but not all of the action prioritization the Commission considered, and leave room for further conversation around prioritization of the actions as the action implementation plans are being developed. The 5 actions are 5 of the largest greenhouse gas emission reducing actions, which was the Commission's most heavily weighted criteria in evaluating the actions. And they are common to both scenarios, the electrification and the hybrid scenario. In addition, they scored well overall. And the key, getting to some of the points Chair McDonald was just making, there's the ability to implement them soon. They have existing delivery mechanisms. So the actions are to weatherize 95% of existing commercial building envelopes by 2040, weatherize 95% of the existing residential home envelopes by 2040, improve energy efficiency of existing non-climate protection program covered industrial facilities by 50% by 2050, commercial code energy reduction 60% by 2030, and then the analog of the residential code energy reduction 60% by 2030. Some of these actions have dates that extend beyond the date of the accelerated 2030 goal, but action is necessary in the near term to be able to achieve the long-term goal. So for example, to achieve the weatherize 95% of existing residential home envelopes by 2040 action, it was assumed that over half the residential buildings would need to be weatherized by 2030, and a rapid uptake in the near term would be needed to do so. That's sub-recommendation 2. I can finish up with sub-recommendation C and then open up for questions. So sub-recommendation C continues to focus on public engagement on design and plans for implementation of the TIGR actions, and remains the same. We just added a adequately resource, which is what we meant when we said resource. This and the public engagement, the idea is that it can help inform prioritization of the actions moving forward. Okay, so that's the revision to recommendation 3 and the sub-recommendations, and definitely open to any questions or comments.
Zach, I just add one more thing, which is that in recommendation A and B, the word study seemed to be a bit controversial with different meanings to different people, so we actually took that word out, so it no longer has that in it.
Any questions for staff? I think the other decision that we are making in the recommendations that we have before us is that at one point in time, we considered whether we would pick one scenario or the other. And in discussions at many of our last meetings, we had discussed the fact that we want, as I said earlier, we want to kind of keep all the tools available and all the types of actions available at this point in time. And so we are not recommending one over the other scenario, but are really recommending that we advance all the actions that we identified. So that's inherent in recommendation 3. Any Suzanne Carlson?
Yeah, thanks. Suzanne Carlson with ODOT, Climate Office Director. I think particularly on item A, I mean, ODOT, we have a climate office. ODOT is committed to implementing the statewide transportation strategy and addressing climate emissions in the transportation sector. As we get into the how, we definitely have some questions and want some ongoing conversation about kind of roles and responsibilities. If this is if it's new workload, September 2024 is not probably a workable turnaround to get funded and increase staff. So these would be, given that these are the marginal actions that adds to the portfolio, and we have modeling that may have been different in terms of what impacts go where. Probably just need some more discussion around how this builds from existing or creates new work and what the resources are to deliver on that. So just more conversation there, and then probably falls under section 5 a little bit in terms of those, like who takes the lead and what sort of reporting requirements are and so forth of independent agencies. So thanks.
So would you have a recommendation for changes to the wording of A?
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's the word direct, although I think we're talking about the legislature directing us. I mean, if it's the Oregon Global Warming Commission, then directing ODOT may be a little tricky.
It would be the legislature. Yeah. We should maybe make that clear. Right. Maybe we can do that in a preface to all the recommendations. What if it said ideally no later than 2024 or something like that? Give a little wiggle room. Would that help address your concern?
Well, maybe it might depend what it looks like. So congestion pricing, right? We have a pretty strong direction that we're moving in there already. And so how does that fit with the legislature and Oregon Global Warming Commission maybe having us write it out in a different way, deliver it in a different way versus what we have been doing public engagement on to date? Yeah, I just think I'm not sure offhand what's in the wording versus what's in just the development as we go forward.
Yeah, good question. I think our goal is to put as little burden on new planning and writing as possible.
Okay,
and
that's reassuring.
I would think you might be able to write a 2-page report on where things stand, what else needs to be done to finish the congestion pricing, for example. Something along those lines that would be pretty simple and straightforward, and or would point, or a document that would point back to the key documents that you've already generated that speak to the how and how you're proposing to do this, how it's addressing equity, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Cody Meyer.
Chairman Don, can I respond to Suzanne for a sec?
Sure.
So
yeah.
Just to clarify 2 points. One, there's a lot more. These are just the headings of the recommendations. There's a lot more detail in the actual document. second one is that this particular one only calls for the development of the action implementation plan, which is not the actual implementation. So this is just getting down what needs to occur and how it needs to occur and what the delivery pathways
Interesting.
are, what the
Thanks.
funding sources are. So for those that are a long way already towards that, it's just a matter of putting it into a format, probably for a lot of them, like maybe congestion pricing, for instance, food waste. But for others, they just don't even exist. So that's the nature of having an extended timeline. Those ones that need a lot more work as opposed to ones that are almost there or are already to go. And then we get the happy phase of actually implementing them and getting reductions in emissions.
Cody Meyer.
Thanks, Chair McDonald. So Cody Meyer, DLCD. I might suggest on to Suzanne's point here that since ODOT, DEQ, DLCD, and ODO are working on the Every Mile Counts program with a 2-year work plan, that we have some of these spelled out in that work plan that we do every 2 years, and it's no light effort for our staff to go and put that together. So I really appreciate the call out to the transportation emissions dashboard, and maybe a similar wording could be used here to say, you know, to the extent possible, build upon the work planning and pull from that to really kind of conserve staff resources. So from DLCD's perspective, it really, the funding would be crucial for that. If depending on the level of effort, that we really are a pretty small agency, we would, you know, the direction is good, but the funding is necessary for us. Lastly, I just wanted to really thank staff, Alan and Zach, for working through this with us, and appreciate the responsiveness.
Thank you, Cody. It's been really helpful to be able to work with your team as well. Commissioner Apter?
Thank you. I actually just lowered my hand. I think I may have answered the question I had. Part of what I'm trying to figure out with the red lines in the full draft document is how exactly the full suite of actions is going to be presented. I think appreciate the amendments that were made to move away from tiers and really emphasize that these are all actions that need to be taken. And I think this is a really creative and great way to lay that out. I'm just not, the question I had was around just exactly how the 5 kind of top priority actions were identified. I think that's clear in the prefacing language, but I'm just not seeing exactly how those are going to be presented in context with the full suite of actions, if that makes sense, because I'm only seeing strikeouts for the others. And so
there is a table. There is a table that includes all of the actions.
So that's where it would be.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's page 12.
Correct. At 12 and 13,
Okay.
and the 5 were the top 5 that already had delivery mechanisms or pathways to deliver.
Okay.
And that were common to both scenarios, because there's, you know, some questions around certain or need for more work and understanding around certain risk and uncertainty on some of the actions. And so we wanted to stick with the ones that were common at both and were high greenhouse gas reducing.
Thank you both. And so as far as I know, we had talked about in previous meetings, potentially identifying, so it's very clear for all audiences kind of who the decision maker or responsible entity is for a given action. It seems like with these action implementation plans, the recommendation is for the legislature potentially to direct and fund state agencies. Is that correct? I'm just looking again at kind of the overall chart and making clear kind of who the next decision maker entity is in implementing a given recommended action.
Yeah, ideally, I think it would be great if we could include a short description for each of the actions with, who we think needs to do what. And also to capture some of the criteria and analysis that we did in terms of co-benefits. Whether we can get that done and meet our deadline for getting the report out, or whether we do that as a follow-up as part of this action planning, I think we need a little flexibility, given that it might not be clear to us exactly what is needed next, and it will take us some time to maybe nail that down with in coordination with the other agencies.
And in keeping with that, and given where we are in the session and the short timeline, it might be something that the legislature says direct the action plans to be implemented and coordinate with Global Warming Commission, and not have it all specifically laid out yet, because we don't have all that laid out yet. We haven't even approved the plan yet.
And I will
We're
also
getting there.
I will also note that sub-recommendation A does say in coordination with the Global Warming Commission, so we were hoping that that would help have that kind of who's making the next decision and ensuring that these are moving along as hoped.
Any questions or concerns about what's laid out in recommendation 3? Zach mentioned this is the one that got the most edits, and where we tried to respond to the input that we had at our last commission meeting and public comments that we received. Okay, I don't see any hands up. Carry on.
Maybe
there's
just a last quick comment. I saw that there's some woulds and shoulds and will and coulds and there's no shalls, but maybe just have an eye towards that, because I did see there were some that were changed to accommodate kind of our comments that just the roles and responsibilities.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We will double check that and make sure we're being consistent and clear about which of those 3 words we think needs to be in here. And I'm assuming that, to your point, there are no shalls. I assume that we would just try to be consistent on would and should.
And will.
Will. Is that clear,
Thanks.
Zach?
Sorry for jumping in.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
That's great.
Thanks for
Appreciate
flagging.
Okay, I think you can carry on, Zach.
All right, so the next batch, and I'm just being mindful of, I know we're saying public comment around 10:30, so I'll try to run through these quick. We've got recommendation 4, 5, and 6, and the good news is that there was only one slightly substantive change on the recommendation 6, so this will be a little less in depth for these. So just to refresh your memory, recommendation 4 talked about future studies and analysis. We didn't really change anything in the introductory text, but the big highlight, which was raised a little earlier, is that we added a new sub-recommendation to be clear about updating the roadmap every 4 years. We had a reference in sub-recommendation A, which recommends funding for a biennial detailed forecast of emissions, kind of similar to what we did with this TIGR analysis. And in the description of that, we mentioned that every 4 years, the forecast would serve as the basis for updating the roadmap. But given the importance of updating the roadmap, we wanted to shine a bit more light on that with a separate sub-recommendation. And also, the sub-recommendation highlights the need for public engagement, particularly with environmental justice communities, similar to what we're recommending happen in sub-recommendation 3 around the Tigger actions that we just reviewed. But that would happen from the start of future roadmap development processes where environmental justice communities would be involved from the start. So in addition, it notes that future roadmaps would benefit from additional resources for a more comprehensive analysis of the co-benefits, reflecting a comment from the last commission meeting, and then Gabrielle, your comment earlier. So that is how we were trying to address that, and definitely heard your comment about maybe a framing of trying to ensure that we're being clear that around maybe reframing this particular sub-recommendation to be a little bit more clear why it's important to have more information to be able to then update the roadmap. The other change here, which is not reflected in the actual sub-recommendation language on this slide, but in sub-recommendation 4D, regarding the National Working Land efforts, we added a sentence in the description noting that it should also include the study of workforce and training needs called for in the Global Warming Commission's National Working Lands proposal to ensure economic opportunities are maximized for the particular sector. And then the last change here was on sub-recommendation 4E, which deals with recommending DEQ do a study of consumption-based emissions and report to the legislature. We added that the study and report should be done in consultation with the Global Warming Commission and also delivered to the Global Warming Commission in addition to the legislature. We also included recommendations regarding, included that it would be good if that report would include recommendations regarding regularly updating the consumption-based emissions inventory. The intention of all of these additions was to underscore the interest of the Commission in the issue and facilitate the Commission's role in helping highlight and recommend actions to address this portion of Oregon's carbon footprint. So that's recommendation 4. I'm going to go through recommendation 5 and wrap up with recommendation 6 and then open it up for questions. So recommendation 5 deals with governance and accountability. In sub-recommendation 5A, which addresses resources for the Global Warming Commission, we added a note about the resources that would be needed to carry out updates of the roadmap every 4 years. So hearkening back to the additional sub-recommendation that I just mentioned in talking about recommendation 4. In sub-recommendation 5C, which deals with adding voting members, there was a suggestion in public comment to add a local government representative, which we thought was a good idea since the Commission is charged with making recommendations to better coordinate state and local climate efforts. And right now, there's not a specific seat for local government on the Commission. So with that said, adding another seat on top of the other additions that were already recommended would put the Commission at an even number of voting members. So to offset the addition and keep an odd number to help facilitate if there were a tie vote or things like that, we suggested removing one of the 5 unspecified at-large voting members. So there are 6 voting members that specifically, currently there are 6 voting members that have specific experience that is detailed out in the statute. And then there are 5 at-large members that can have varied experience. And so we were just saying now that we're designating a few more with specific experience, kind of makes sense to move down the number of at-large ones, keep a manageable number, and also keep it at a odd number of members so that we can ensure the commission can do its business. The sub-recommendation 5D, dealing with agency reporting, got a lot of conversation and comments at the last commission meeting, and then subsequent conversations and comments. So we definitely heard the concern about potential issues with requiring annual reporting, so changed it to regular reporting, and also noted that the existing agency reporting would be leveraged so as not to duplicate efforts, per comments from some comments from the last meeting. Similarly, in recommendation 5E, which deals with creating a dashboard to help track progress on the state's climate goals, we also mentioned the importance of leveraging existing agency dashboards so as not to reinvent the wheel, again, per comments at the last commission meeting and follow-up written comments. And to that end, we are also referring to it as a dashboard and clearinghouse to make the point that it's the dashboard and a clearinghouse to be able to bring together other resources like other agency dashboards to be able to facilitate tracking climate progress. And then we also clarified that it would also track sequestration efforts in addition to emissions reductions. So that was the summary for recommendation 5. And then real quick on recommendation 6, the only change substantive change we made in there was related to sub-recommendation A, just to make sure it was clear that federal funding opportunities will also include opportunities for national working lands projects. We said climate and clean energy, and just didn't want natural working lands to get lost in that description. So that's what I've got for those 4, 5, and 6, and happy to answer any questions.
One add to that on the co-benefits further study, that's not been usually done. It's not been done to a great degree in Oregon, and it's very difficult to do, as we found out, and it's not usually done in other places, especially in creating climate action plans. They usually stop at the marginal abatement cost curves, or MAC curves, which is just how cost effective they are, do it in that order. So it's rather unique and pushes the envelope in the TIGR project that we went over there into trying to incorporate co-benefits into the decision making. It's a lot easier to create the evaluation criteria on co-benefits than it is to actually evaluate and score them, as we found out. But we knew that kind of going in. And globally, in this area, not just in TIGR, it's just not as far along as a science as, say, evaluating economics and environmental impacts. A good example is the triple bottom line, where social equity is usually the last and the most underdeveloped of all the analyses that goes on with that. So that's the need for the comment or the bullet in here for further study on this stuff. And maybe Oregon can once again lead the way on this.
We can't hear you, Kathy.
Kathy, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just saying that I think on recommendation 4, Zach, if you could go back to 4, that we were proposing to reframe the rationale for recommendation B so that it's clearer what, that our intent to update this every 4 years is to, be able to provide decision makers with the most up-to-date information to drive climate action. And I just wanted to check back in with you, Gabriella, and make sure that we captured your thought there in terms of how we might redesign some of the supporting text.
Yeah, two things. Thank you, Chair McDonald. Two things. One, just again, in the interest of the effectiveness or compellingness, to coin a word, of this section, support future study and analysis may not grab people as much as develop essential data and metrics to inform for the action or whatever, however you want to frame it. So that's just a suggestion to just make it, what makes it compelling? Why is this important? So the framing overall for that section. And I will double check, but part of what we had talked about, and Ellen, totally acknowledge what you are flagging, and it's true. And we don't have a health economist in the Oregon Health Authority, right? But health is one of the most motivating factors for people to care about climate action. And so it doesn't have to be an OHA, it can be elsewhere, but that idea of bringing, we just haven't tried, we really haven't tried that much, right? And ideally the federal government would be doing this, and they've done it in certain contexts where they have the regulatory framework like the Clean Air Act, they develop it, right? So in the absence of a national climate, serious climate framework of that nature, it does fall on the states to try to push the envelope, and Oregon punches above its weight, right? So at least putting that as an aspirational goal is flagging it. And also because Oregon's doing so much, you were able to get funding, private funding, to do this work. Putting it out there may, build it and they will come, or imagine it and they will come. So just kind of an encouragement to think about it in that context.
Great.
And then just in terms of the narrative also, I think we talked about just in the context saying, just flagging more clearly that this is missing data. So just highlighting that, and I will take a closer look. And full confession, I'm multitasking, doing bill analyses while I'm on this call. So my apologies. That's why I was quickly searching and jumped ahead. But that's my piece on recommendation 4. And I don't know if I think I had one on I'll have to look if it was 5 or 6 when we get to that one. But
Okay, thank you. So we may tap you to help us with that, the language for framing that.
Yeah, happy to.
Any other comments, concerns, or questions around, I see Suzanne, around recommendation 4.
I'm waiting on 5.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. Anything else on 4?
Just one other comment on 4B. So that's the updating of the entire roadmap, but we have also mentioned along the way, we're trying to get funding and put together a kind of a revision and addition to the Tigger analysis in the 2-year time frame to bring inside when we know more about the federal dollars that will affect the cost effectiveness of different programs. There are also different actions that that we need to add in and look at in more refined detail, and so there'll be a lot some things that we're trying to do in the near term, but this is really getting at the redo of the whole thing and start kind of from scratch, hopefully.
Thank you,
I
Ellen.
wonder, Ellen, doesn't that kind of underscore that this isn't just about updating the plan every 4 years? It's all these other important things that have to happen even sooner. So
Correct. Right. Yeah. You mean the 1 million things that happen to actually have this happen?
Okay. Anything else from commissioners on 4? Okay, let's go to 5, and Suzanne, you're up.
Thank you, Chair McDonald. I appreciate the changes to D with the reporting frequency. That can be a real bear. ODOT submitted comments that we do have, as Cody mentioned, the Every Mile Counts. We have a lot of multi-agency collaboration that happens, and it's robust and I want to say time consuming, but that's not the main point I want to make really, that it's time consuming, but I think the products are really good. So we appreciate on E, the addition of our transportation sector dashboard. I think I'm curious to hear more about the change from dashboard to also a clearinghouse. Our transportation emissions dashboard, and we haven't opened it up yet, so maybe folks can't see it, but we probably worked on it for 9 months in collaboration with all of our Every Mile Counts partners and Department of Energy and others. So we feel like it's a very comprehensive report out on the statewide transportation strategy and the transportation sector. So maybe just more discussion there if it's useful to have these parallel paths that have different methodology, or if those can be, if ours can play a primary role just with the body of work that's gone into that. And we can continue the conversation at staff level. I just want to note that I don't know if other agencies feel like they have some reporting that they've done, but that's for ODOT. Our comment there. Thanks.
Zach, do you want to speak to this concept a little bit more? Or?
Sure. I think the idea is to be able to aggregate all of the reporting that is already happening, because there's not like a one-stop shop for it across the state enterprise. I've seen a quick preview of the ODOT transportation dashboard, and it looks great. And I think it's going to be an awesome piece for transportation, but we don't necessarily have that type of analysis or display for other work. And so we want to be able to have a one-stop shop where folks can go, and then that one-stop shop would have links to programs, to the agency programs. So leveraging all the existing stuff that the agencies already have out there, but just providing one place for people to be able to go through it. And I think in our minds, it was the ability to be able to have some place where folks, because of our biennial reports that try to aggregate that information, they stay static after you write that and publish it. And so this would be a place where we could continuously be updating in the meantime, and being able to provide as relevant and up-to-date information as possible.
Colin?
Add a couple of things to that.
Okay.
One, this is intended to be a statewide look. It's not just individual sectors. So it's supposed to kind of pull it all together. So how are we doing in terms of progress of meeting our statewide goals? And like Zach said, the clearinghouse part of it is tended to be kind of like make this thing be the Fred Meyer of global warming or climate change data. So if anybody wants to, then they would be able to go to all these different places. And
can we be the Whole Foods that have transportation?
Yes. It's not intended to be redundant, more complementary. So we'd use the data and the dashboards coming from them. But it's also important to take into account that we need to be all in the same place in terms of apples and oranges. You want to be everybody talking about apples. So the framework needs to be consistent. Maybe that's where this occurs if it doesn't occur in other places. But again, it's supposed to be using the work that you've already done and minimize the work that goes out to agencies as much as possible. But having said that, one of the things we found in Tigger is we don't track a lot of this stuff. It was hard to get information on a lot of this stuff. So there's going to be times where we need to be tracking this and nobody's tracking it. Somebody needs to track it. Part of it.
Colin. So you're on mute.
All right, how about now?
Perfect.
All right, great. I seem to be double muted every time we join these meetings. Yeah, thanks for the chance to comment here on this. I just want to express from DEQ standpoint, we really appreciate this recommendation and the concept and hope to see it to fruition. We have two different ways that our agency measures greenhouse gas emissions. The traditional sector-based inventory that the commission has so often used and reported out on the legislature, as well as the consumption-based lens that and so pairing this with the recommendation in under 4 to continue to update that second look or lens, along with additional ones such as sequestration or emissions from natural and working lands. We think it's great to be able to really amplify those existing two lenses that our agency reports out on regularly for the sector-based approach, irregularly, but hopefully regularly in the future for consumption, and pairing that with additional ways to look at Oregon's climate footprint. We think it's a really great idea, and happy to help Odo and the commission develop that. Just wanted to express our support on this one. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Colin.
I really like that phraseology that amplifies what's already going on. That's a good way to put it, Colin.
Gabriella, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, first, thank you, appreciate and support the inclusion of OHA as a named agency in B. And then, I'm sorry, yeah, in B. And then in C, I just wanted to ask about the local government representation. Thinking about climate-friendly and equitable rules, thinking about resources that are going to be tapped and coming to local governments. If there's just one, is that, one just for Association of Counties to pick and not League of Cities, Oregon cities? Is that urban versus rural, large versus small? And, we have this in a lot of different contexts where there, maybe it's just two, and with some, one rural, one urban, or something like that. But I guess just flagging that it's going to be, more and more important as they are resourced to do this work and required to do this work. How do you get them at the table in a way that really engages them and makes it meaningful for local governments? So was just wondering about having just one.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the other thing we might want to change is the existing 6 members who are representing, who are in named seats, are supposed to have experience, local government experience, which is a little different than representative, I think. Although maybe to be consistent, because we're also using representative above. Fine to leave it as representative. I think your point's well taken. Our governments are very different across the state, and local governments entertain 2 local government representatives to try and address that and get some diversity. The way that our current voting members are determined, it's a governor decision. And so that this would follow that same pathway, I think. Any thoughts on Gabriella's recommendation that we maybe think a little more broadly about how to engage local government expertise on the commission? Not seeing any.
Chair McDonald, I would
Yes.
just comment that I represent a rural county, and I'm familiar with the local needs and local government. So in a way, we're already doing that.
That's a good point. Yeah, so our commissioners wear several hats and bring several different perspectives.
Yeah, I will add to that as well. I'm on the city council in the city of Dundee, and so I do look through that lens as well at these issues. But yeah, I mean, having someone specifically for local government as representative, I would support the basic concept.
I am mindful of how big our commission already is. That's the one, concern that I have as we start talking about making, adding more and more people. We kind of found a way to do that without expanding it too significantly. But I think we just need to be a little careful on that. Any other reaction to any modification of C? Gabriella, with the comments from Commissioner Reitman and Ford, Commissioners Reitman and Ford, are you comfortable with the notion of it just being one?
I wouldn't express that too. I was thinking just a practical method, adding one local government representative could attract questions about that. And so it may be that the point is that you don't need that maybe because you are already looking for that in other commissioners, by bringing that perspective. So, it was really more kind of a good appointment management thing of when the practical effect of just saying you'll have one local government representative, and what will that seat do and very mindful of not wanting to have such an unwieldy size. So if the appointments are happening, cognizant of needing to get those kind of perspectives on there already, maybe you don't need one more representative. But so certainly not opposed to appointing one. It was more a practical.
Yeah, good. I think it's a good point.
Okay.
Okay.
A comment in the chat around, possibly someone from League of Cities or Association of Counties that could help address the concern you raised, Gabriella. And I'm also wondering if, given the conversation and considerations we just talked about, whether rather than a standalone representative, it could be a greater intention around outreach and making local government representatives aware of Global Warming Commission processes and conversations, and just so there's some, again, more intentional outreach and communication around those opportunities to weigh in. Because I think part of it is just making sure that there's awareness, and given we can't have representatives from every single local government body, maybe that's a way to address the need here.
Well, and if you went with AOC and LOC, maybe that's I don't know how they would feel, or if there's precedent for them being ex officio non-voting members. Those organizations would bring the perspective of their membership more broadly.
And remember that voting members are all appointed by the governor. So in essence, you can punt this over to the governor and lobby for that appointment, taking into consideration, there's only, 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. There's one transportation.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It was just raising a thought, not a big issue.
No, it's a good point. And we could definitely think about it on the non-voting side. Recommendation 5B is adding a lot of new state agencies to the commission. And some of those that are currently in, we have a set of 3 non-voting at-large members that we can appoint from either other agencies or academia. Maybe that would be a way for us to include local governments if we put that over on the non-voting side. And then maybe reduce some of the at-large non-voting members. I'd like to give that a little more thought.
Chair McDonald, just one other thought. It should be incumbent upon the governor to appoint people who who aren't just one issue or one organization or one entity, but that we
Really good point.
represent the diversity of the state.
Absolutely. Really good point. Any concerns about taking the local government out of the voting membership list and putting it into the non-voting membership list?
Chair McDonald, I would just want to check this statute because I think it might say ex officio, meaning the office of the director for at least the state agencies, and we just need to make sure that that works. But just a technical question.
Yeah, good point, Zach. Okay. And any other comments on recommendation 5? Then let's go to, I assume they're probably, well, let's go to recommendation 6, just to wrap things up. Any questions or comments on the change, which Zach had highlighted, which was just to make sure we were reflecting the fact that the federal funding from the IRA and IIJA is also directed at natural and working lands. Okay. Well, with that, we are a little bit behind time. We do have time for public comment. Linda, do you have a sense of how many people have signed up for public comment?
We have 2 people signed up for public comment, Angus Duncan and Linda Craig.
Great. And if anybody else wants to make sure, let Linda know. And
Chair McDonald, I think Eric Street has stand up in the attendees list.
So there's Eric.
Okay, great. And if you can try and keep your comments to a couple of minutes, we would appreciate it.
I will start with Angus.
Welcome, Angus.
Commission members and Chair McDonald, I assume that you can hear me unless you're waving at me and telling me you're not.
We can hear you. You're a little faint, but we can hear you.
A little faint, huh? Well, that's probably just my retiring nature. What you mostly don't need from a former member and chair is her regular, critiques, and so I've tried to keep my participation in your processes to a minimum, but I follow them carefully. And I would just start out by saying I'm extremely gratified by 2 things that the Commission has done recently. One is the natural and working lands recommendations. And the second, which you are taking action on, I hope today, is modifying the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. Would note that when we originally developed these goals back 20 years ago, we set a 2050 goal of at least 75%. That was reflecting the fact that neither we nor the world scientists knew exactly what 2050 ought to look like. And we have a much better sense for it now. And so I appreciate your revising that 2050 goal in particular upwards and inserting an additional intermediate goal. So those are the things I really like. The concerns I have and the written comment that I submitted has to do with the actions in these recommendations. And my particular concerns are these. First, consistently over the last 20 years, our recommendations have, well, there have been many. They have focused particularly on electrification of the vehicle fleet, especially the light duty vehicle fleet, and not just the conversion of it, but the pace of conversion. Secondly, transit, and not just electrification of transit buses, but more to the point, service levels and frequencies and extensions of those transit services into particularly low-income household neighborhoods. And third was land use, which is addressed here, but it's not addressed in the the way I think we have consistently identified it, which is with a priority on increasing densities in transit corridors so that you have both supported the people who are moving into those corridors and living and shopping them, and you are supporting transit service and increasing load levels in those buses and trains. I am generally concerned that the actions that are recommended by the commission here rely heavily on the regulatory tools that we have been able to put in place in the last 20 years, but are pretty quiet or even silent on giving comparable emphasis to the enabling actions, and particularly in transportation, which has been a focus of the state theoretically for 20 years, but in that 20 years, those emissions have gone sideways consistently. And I don't think that these recommendations are going to alter that particularly. I have suggested in my written comment some more detailed enabling actions that I don't see in here, and I won't repeat those today, but they are really important. Secondly, there needs to be a much greater sense of urgency, and I am concerned with ODOT's comments today about quote unquote needing more time, noting that the first transportation recommendations were given to the state and to ODOT 20 years ago when we delivered recommendations to Governor Kulongoski. They were reiterated and refined 10 years ago in the STS, which ODOT developed and I participated in, and it includes both regulatory and enabling actions that are not showing up here. Now we are on Every Mile Counts, but in the meantime, emissions continue to go sideways. The fleet conversion, while it's happening, is happening at far too slow a pace to have any chance of hitting the kinds of goals that you are aiming at. And generally, the recommendations of TIGR actions don't align with those three areas of emphasis that we have identified, as a state, that we have identified representing NRDC, the pace of EV conversion, transit service levels, and land use policies that support transit. So I'm going to stop there. I'll let you look at detail in the written comment if to the extent folks are interested. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Angus. Yeah, I think one of the things in general that I would like to see us do a stronger job of in the future is really kind of looking below just the kinds of actions and really getting into the enabling conditions that are needed to meet those actions. And perhaps we can better address that through the action implementation plans to be able to describe what are the key enabling conditions that have to go along with the action. So that might be one way that we could do a better job of getting to those concerns, because I think you're pointing it out in transportation, which is really important because it's such a big part of our emissions. But I think that the same is true for some of the actions and some of the other actions, the kinds of enabling conditions that are needed. Alan, do you want to speak to Angus's
Yeah,
comment?
very good comment, Angus. Two things to keep into consideration, though. One is that there's two parts to this analysis that we're doing. The first part was the programs and regulations already adopted that we have, which are all those 15 programs, a lot of which Every Mile Counts is embedded in that. A lot of those things happen in that space to get us to meet our 2035 goal. The TIGR actions were to actually go beyond that and are a subset of that. And we actually eliminated out of consideration a lot of things that we thought were going to happen inside the programs and regulations already adopted space to get to the 2035 goal, and focused on those things that we thought that the state could facilitate action on by doing these particular actions, none of which are big lever actions. They're all kind of small. But also the limitation of the analysis is that we were focusing on direct emission reductions to meet the goal number. And so all those things that are enabling, we noted, but they didn't help us get to the goal, but they're essential at the same time. So good comment.
Hey, Linda, Craig.
Linda Craig did say she didn't need to make a comment. After all, she knows
Okay.
I had her question addressed, but we do have Eric. Just a moment.
Great. Eric Strud, welcome.
Eric, you're
Eric?
unmuted.
These are comments that will probably you'll consider as old, but they come from the perspective of retired CEO of a public company. 3 dimensions strike me as pretty fundamentally problematic here in addressing a crisis. Number 1 is time, urgency. A typical public company will close their accounting books within a week or 2 of every quarter. And that includes all of the major result metrics necessary within the company. A roadmap every 4 years strikes me as absurd. This should be 6 months or less. A second dimension is accountability, where I've been pounding the drum in various ways to get the executive branch to adopt result metrics. They're good at process metrics. Well, we spent this much time at it and we spent this much money at it. But result metrics like 2020 is off by 11%, 2021 emissions off by 19%. That's a giant red flag. In a well-run company, there are very fast feedback loops that look at those result metrics more often than annually, more often than quarterly. And those feedback loops are accelerated partly because by minimizing the complexity. I see all the different agencies involved here. I think, well, a company would probably say, let's have ODOT in charge of the transportation. That's the biggest rock in the box now. OPUC on electricity and natural gas. Somebody in charge of buildings and somebody in charge of industrial. And they would have very clear result metrics that they're expected to hit every year. The third dimension is transparency of data. There is a careful transparency of what a public company will show its investors, but internally, you've got to have copious real-time data available to everybody. The modeling, I've talked about the modeling where the Energy Innovation and now RMI are going to be supporting state level simulators, and I don't see why we try to compete with that. Yes, we need to have other simulations. No simulator does everything. But these are so, what the Global Warming Commission is doing is so far out of whack from what a company would do is I don't know where to start. So I don't know if that's useful or if you just want to ignore me some more, but I'm available if you want some help. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. I do really appreciate your comments and feel the sense of urgency and been thinking about some of your comments from earlier meetings and just trying to think through how we would go about doing that. Some of the things that you're asking for are pretty big undertakings, and we would need a fleet of staff in each of the agencies to be able to do that more quickly. It would put a lot of onus on businesses as well. Maybe that's appropriate. So I appreciate it. I think we do want to do as much as we can relative to transparency. I think that's some of the concept behind a dashboard and the clearinghouse. Perhaps you could give us some thoughts offline about how we might think about your transparency and accountability as we think through how to build that. So I do really appreciate your comments, and we'll follow up with you to think about how we can try and address those to the greatest extent practical. Alan, did you want to respond? You have your hand up.
Yeah, but you actually said what I was going to say, Kathy, which is that's the purpose behind the dashboard, is to get to results metrics so we can track where we are, not exactly in real time, but as best as we can in terms of meeting our goals and moving on the action implementation plans and all of the programs and regulations that we've already got adopted, plus all the secret tracing. So the dashboard is supposed to be able to help us get there. And it will build over time. It won't be perfect when it first comes out.
Great, thank you.
Chair McDonald, well, just as a general comment, yeah, that's all good, and in business we can move faster. Politics is a different game, and sometimes if we push too hard too fast, then there's repercussions too. So just have to watch out so that we actually do accomplish what we want to, even if it's a little bit slower.
Good point, Commissioner Reitman, and it is really important that we also take the time we need to engage Oregonians in how we solve this problem. So trying to kind of balance those two things.
So, Chair McDonald.
Commissioner Ford.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make a comment as well. I appreciate the comments in regards to transparency. I think we are doing a better job at that. Business and government aren't the same. It would be nice if they were closer in alignment, but in particular, I think what we need to pay attention to moving forward is one of the thought processes, which is, are we measuring process, or are we measuring outcomes? And I think we just, as we set up the dashboard concept, let's make sure that we really do keep an eye for the outcomes rather than the process. And because I think that's going to be helpful to everybody. So I do appreciate the public comment on this point. Government and business are different and have different roles. But I do think that we certainly can work on our transparency, and in particular work on the outcome goals that we're measuring against. And I think that'll be beneficial to everybody. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Ford. Linda, has anybody else signed up to?
Yes, we do. We have a Kay Jellen Bletcher. Just a moment.
Sorry, I missed that name.
K Jellenbel.
Yes. Hello, am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yes, you are.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hello, my name is Kellen Belcher, and I really appreciate both the opportunity to comment and appreciate all of the Commission's leadership on climate action. I'm a climate policy manager with the Environmental Defense Fund, and I'm speaking today on behalf of EDF's 70,000 members and activists in Oregon. We must act to reduce carbon emissions, and we must act quickly. We have less than a decade to cut global greenhouse gas emissions in half to avoid catastrophic and irreversible climate impacts. Oregonians are already experiencing dangerous climate and health impacts as a result of fossil fuel use, with communities of color, low-income households, and rural communities bearing a disproportionate burden. EDF strongly supports the Commission's recommendation updating Oregon's statutory climate goals. The targets in these updated recommendations are consistent with the best available science and consistent with both the level of climate action we are seeing from Oregon's West Coast neighbors and the level of ambition of President Biden's national climate commitment. Interim 2030 and 2040 targets are especially important for keeping Oregon on pace and driving near-term reductions. The impact of long-lived greenhouse gas emissions is cumulative. Much of the pollution we're emitting into the atmosphere today will linger and continue to cause warming for decades to come. So ensuring persistent year-over-year emissions reductions in line with interim goals is critical. We also want to emphasize that Oregon's climate programs and regulations will need to be expanded, accelerated, and made more comprehensive in order to ensure that the state actually achieves these ambitious updated targets. I'd like to also voice really strong support for the draft recommendation to position Oregon to take full advantage of federal investments in climate action. These investments really offer a golden opportunity for states to supercharge their progress on clean economic growth while lowering energy costs and also reducing harmful climate and air pollution. I also want to note the strong connection between these two things, between updating Oregon's climate targets and maximizing the federal funding that Oregon can receive. Updating Oregon's climate targets and providing certainty that they'll be achieved will provide confidence and certainty that the state's economy is on a consistent pathway for reducing emissions, which will in turn provide the confidence and certainty needed to help catalyze projects and investments, including in the private sector. So I'll just close by saying we're extremely appreciative of all the work that this commission has done. This has been a huge undertaking, and the resulting recommendations to update Oregon's statutory climate targets are thoughtful, ambitious, and a very important step forward for putting Oregon on a path to cut emissions at the pace and scale science tells us is necessary. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kellen. Appreciate that. Okay. We are due to take a break. Just before we do, I'd like to, to just kind of tee up what I'm hoping will happen next. Which is commissioners can identify any additional discussion you want to have on the specific recommendations. And then what I'm hoping for is that someone will be able to make a motion with as many of the things that we think we all agree on based on some of the conversation today. And then if we need to come back and have additional discussion on individual recommendations, we can do that. So just let me reframe how I said that. So we'll ask people to flag any topics that need additional discussion, and then after that, we'll ask for a motion to advance as many of the recommendations as we can. And then if we don't get a vote in favor of something with all of them, then we need to revisit one of the sub recommendations. We can go back and do that. So that's how I kind of want to handle the voting after we all come back. And so I think we're slated, Zach, are we slated for a 10-minute break?
I think we had 15 minutes in the agenda, but I know we're a little bit over time, but I think up to you in terms of whether you want to do 10 or 15. And maybe the
let's do 10. So we'll be back here at 11, well, let's say 11:25.
Kathy. I got the recording going again, just in case we want to start up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome back. If you could please either maybe come out, put your video on so that we know when folks are mostly back. Appreciate it. It's like we might be still missing a few people. If folks could put their videos on when you're back with us, you can turn it off again, but just that'll help us track who's with us. Yes, Cheryl. Kristen, are you back with us? Kristen, just a minute more. Kristen, if you can turn your video back on so we know you're with us. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started, and hopefully Kristen will be back shortly. So as we were going through the meeting and discussing possible changes, I made some notes about some things that I think we need to follow up on and just make sure that we're all thinking the same way about the recommendations. And so we discussed splitting 2C into two different recommendations so that we could have a net zero, net negative goal, and we could have a sequestration goal. To clarify that, achieving net zero, we can consider a wider range of ways of getting to net zero than just natural and working lands. Obviously, I think we have a lot of reasons to be thinking about that first, but there are other ways that we can get there. So we wanted to separate those two to make it really clear. And I think we also wanted to make it clear that the commission would be engaged in making recommendations on both those fronts. So I think we had a pretty good conversation about that. And we don't have language drafted, but I feel like the conversation was robust enough that we could have staff come back with new recommendations and based on the discussion that we had. That's at least my view. We talked quite a bit. Well, there are a lot of changes in recommendation 3. We talked quite a bit about the substance of those changes. One thing on my mind as we were in terms of some of the comments that we got from the public, I think we might want to add some language that references the importance of including key and enabling conditions in the AIPs, the action implementation plans. So, we could add that in to make sure that we're asking agencies to consider what some of those key enabling factors might be so that they can get a little more attention as we go into thinking about how to achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve. And then we discussed quite a bit about how to reframe 4B to make it clear why we want to update roadmaps and telling that it's really about getting the most up-to-date information in the hands of decision makers as possible to inform how we do our advance our climate work. And then I think on 5C, we talked about what to do with the local government representation, it now appears in the recommendation about voting members. I think I see three options for how we could handle the local government. We could leave it where it is in the voting members, move it to the non-voting members, or include text that talks about the importance of doing more outreach and engagement with local governments to inform our work and to make sure they're informed by ours. We had conversations about the other two additions, and we checked in with agencies and some other collaborators about those proposed changes. Might be good for us to reach out to folks like the League of Cities and Association of Counties to talk about how they would like to be included in the commission, which I think would lean towards maybe including text that talks about text rather than putting them in one slot or the other. Zach also flagged for us that putting local governments in the non-voting member ex officio category there might be some statutory challenges to that. So those are the things that I think were under consideration around 5C. Are there other recommendations that commissioners want to flag for additional conversation? Director, Commissioner Decker, sorry.
Many different titles rolling around here. Hey, I just wanted to make a comment on the recommendation 5D, I think it is, on agency reporting. And I know that this commission has recognized sort of how much implementation work different agencies have, and in the course of doing that work, right, a lot of information is produced, at least from the Public Utility Commission, whether through the utility clean energy plans that the commission reviews and issues decisions on, or otherwise. I know that you've said sort of that existing agency reporting will be assessed and leveraged to support a new reporting requirement. But I guess I don't need a change in the wording. I guess I just wanted to say for the record that there is other publicly available information that doesn't necessarily qualify as, reporting to someone that would be pertinent, and I hope assessed and leveraged before new reporting requirements were established. Again, I'm not looking to make a change necessarily to the language there, but just because of the demands on our staff's time, as Zach knows well, I just wanted to put out there that comment that reporting is sort of an additional lift to the work that we're doing.
Absolutely, Commissioner Decker. And I know, at least speaking for myself, I want to do as much as I can to minimize any burdens for doing new things that aren't about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So we want the agencies to stay as focused on that as possible. So
thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for taking the comment.
We will definitely keep that well in mind and make sure that whatever reporting we're asking for is as efficient for you as possible.
Thanks.
Zach, did you want to weigh in on other things you think we need to talk about?
Thanks, Chair McDonald. I raised my hand because I just wanted to clarify on the local government piece, either now or when we get to that, on my ex officio comment, just to provide some more detail. So I can do that later. Thanks.
Any other need to go back and have a deeper conversation about other other sub recommendations? Okay. So on 2C and the discussion that we had about splitting those two, and our commissioners, does anybody have any concerns about us giving authority to the staff to draft a new recommendation, or actually, split those two recommendations? And as we discussed, I'm comfortable with that. Certainly would weigh in myself in conjunction with staff, but I'm comfortable that the conversation that we had provides enough direction. Commissioner Reitman?
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. See any other concerns?
I support that as well.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Ford. On 3A, I propose to add and identify key enabling actions to the action implementation plan descriptions. So it wouldn't be a change to the headline of the recommendation, but just include it as one of the key pieces of information that we'd like to see in the AIPs. Any concerns about adding that in? Okay, seeing any. Then on 4, do we need to have, or are there other things in 3 that commissioners wanted to have further conversations about? Okay. On 4, I think we had a pretty good conversation about how we wanted to try and reframe the description of 4B. People good with where we landed on that? Okay. So now we are to the local government. So Zach, do you want to jump in with?
Yeah, thanks, Chair McDonald. It was the lawyer in me speaking on the details, just trying to make sure. So the non-voting members right now are ex officio based on the title of their office. So it made me think, particularly with the conversation around potentially having someone from the League of Oregon Cities or AOC, that just wanted to make sure that I understood whether the commission wanted definitely an elected local government official or was okay with something different. And I'll say that the commission can recommend however it would like to recommend, because these are recommendations to the legislature.
Good point. So I had outlined 3 potential options, leaving it where it is, moving it to non-voting member, or just considering including text within the description about the commission's interest in having expertise in local governments among the commission seats that we have, and more broadly. Potentially to the point that you raised, Zach, if we said something along the lines of the director of the League of Oregon Cities and Association of Oregon Counties, that would be a way to get at kind of naming those without in the same fashion that we do with the agencies. Would that work?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. Just, whether it's local, it doesn't have to be a local elected, I think is the clarification that we need to make.
I want to just have it be local government experience.
Yeah.
Not name anybody.
So any preferences amongst the commissioners regarding one of those three options, voting, non-voting, or just text in the in that recommendation?
I would recommend that we just include it in the text.
That's kind of where I was leaning to, Commissioner Reitman. Any
support that? I would support that.
Great.
Yeah, I would
Thank you,
also
Commissioner
support
Jackson.
that.
Any dissenting opinions? Okay. And then just based on the conversations that we had earlier and Commissioner Decker's comments, maybe give staff the authority to add a little bit of emphasis around how we want to see that reporting and make sure that it's as efficient as possible for the agencies so that they can put their time and attention to implementing the programs that we're talking about. Potentially try and reflect some of Eric Strid's comments to us as well in that, somewhere in that section. You know, recognizing that we also had conversations about the differences between government and businesses, but potentially we could add just the importance of being transparent and accountable and making sure our dashboard focuses on outcomes and, you know, links to processes that are ongoing, but really tries to make sure we're emphasizing the importance of outcomes.
Chair McDonald.
Yes, Commissioner Reitman.
I think that's a good summary, and yes, I would trust the staff to draft the wording based on our discussion.
Thank you. Is there anything else that people want to discuss before we try and get a motion? Okay, hearing none. Would someone like to make a motion?
Sure, Commissioner Reitman here. I would move to adopt the changes as presented and as, I guess, as we will see the wording. I should we put this off because until we actually see the wording that
I would prefer us
next
to
meeting?
make a vote on all of the recommendations today, all that we can anyway. And if and then trust.
All right, my
staff.
motion then is to adopt all the recommendations proposed today.
With the discussed modifications.
Yes, with staff, giving staff leeway to put into words the what we discussed.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Jackson, was that you?
Yes.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Shippentauer. Oh, you're on mute. I'm looking for a yes.
Yes, I support.
Thank you. Commissioner Reitman, well, you made the motion, so we can.
Yes.
And Commissioner Jackson seconded it. Commissioner Apter.
I support.
Commissioner Ford
Support.
and Commissioner Sheeran.
I support.
Well, Mary has been representing David Anderson. Our bylaws, I guess, don't allow somebody who's standing in for someone else to and is a voting member to vote. So we do really appreciate you attending the meeting today on behalf of Commissioner Anderson, but can't take a vote. So with that, the motion carries, and we have a final set of recommendations. So any questions so congratulations to everyone. Again, I want to just emphasize how much work that staff have put into this project, and think it's a significant step forward for the state of Oregon to have a clear idea of where we are with the existing policies that have been put into place, as well as being able to set some additional ambition for reaching what were proposed as 2035 goals by 2030. So really excited about this work and really appreciate all the time and attention the commissioners have given to this along the way. So congratulations to everyone. Zach, do you have any final questions for us relative to direction, or do you feel like you have the direction you need? And Alan's apologies.
I feel like I have the direction I need. And we also will just be cleaning up any formatting or other, minor typo things that we find as we get this ready. And then I think we're going to have a quick discussion of next steps in terms of putting together a commission subcommittee to just do a quick review at the end before we publish it. And then with the hope of publishing, getting it to the legislature.
Absolutely. Alan, anything you want to add?
I just wanted to thank the commission for all the work they've done on this. I believe this is the 13th, lucky 13th meeting on the roadmap Tigger project. So congratulations to all of you for all that work done.
Thank you, Alan. It's been great having your leadership on this.
Chair McDonald.
Yes.
This is Commissioner Ford. I just think, certainly on behalf of me, and I think the other commissioners, we wouldn't be here without your leadership. So you've done a lot behind the scenes. We, I think, are all well aware of that, and are grateful for all that work. So pat on the back to you for sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Ford. Appreciate it. Great. Well, no time to rest on our laurels. We've got some additional work to do to get this all wrapped up.
We're going to Disneyland now.
Zach and I have started having conversations about what might be next for the commission. We've been meeting, we've had a very aggressive meeting schedule for the commission. I think well beyond what I might have told some of you, you would be signing up for when you signed up to be on the commission. So definitely want to be thoughtful on what comes next and what topics we want to really dig into next as a commission. And so we'll be putting some more thought into that. I really welcome both the voting members of the commission and all of the agencies and legislators that are represented on the commission to feel free to send us thoughts about topics. I'm going to suggest that we probably hold a meeting in April, or hold off on another meeting until April, other than the work of a subcommittee, as Zach mentioned, to help us finalize or read through the final report and just make sure that it reflects everything we talked about. in the way that we're hoping for. So that would be my proposal for where we go next, or what's next. We will want to bring some things in front of the commission soon from the natural and working lands work. That's a separate work stream that's been going very well. INR is doing a great job of working with the stakeholder advisory committee, and they are very engaged. We just had a meeting yesterday of that group. So there definitely will be some things that we'll want to bring to the commission. We'll think about whether we need to meet in March or whether we can hold off until April, and we'll be back in touch with all of you with a doodle poll as soon as we've kind of thought that through. So with that, I believe we can adjourn. Zach, is there anything else you want to make sure we touch on?
No, thank you.
Great.
And thanks everyone. And thanks to everyone. I'll just say I joined the process in the kind of towards the end of it, and it's been really great being able to help you all get it across the finish line.
Thank you. And just to remind folks, we will also be doing a regular biennial report to the legislature that will provide an overview of the emissions, and we'll kind of cross-reference the roadmap and the report so that people are well aware that both documents are available. And with that, I will adjourn the February 3rd meeting of the Oregon Global Warming Commission. Thank you all, and thanks to the public that engaged as well.
Kathy, I'm going to go ahead and pull you up on one of our groups afterwards.
Okay,
so,
that sounds great. Bye-bye.
Linda, I already sent an invite for a debrief meeting.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Just updated it for now. Okay.
Perfect.